The drive into Cranbrook always smells the same: pine and cold air and something faintly like wood smoke, even in September. I had the window down a crack even though the temperature had already dropped enough that I probably shouldn't have. I just needed to smell it, needed to remember what it felt like to be from somewhere before I had to walk back into it. My aunt had called 3 weeks earlier, my father's retirement celebration from the RCMP 32 years of service. The detachment was throwing him a formal dinner at the community center. The whole town would be there. She said he wanted me to come. She said it like she wasn't sure she believed it herself. I hadn't been back to Cranbrook in 4 years. There were reasons for that. Most of them had my stepmother's name attached to them. Her name is Diane. She married my father when I was 17, 8 months after my mother passed. She came with opinions the way some people come with luggage, too much of it, all of it heavy, and somehow it always ended up in your way. She had a son from her first marriage, a year older than me, who my father treated like the child he'd always wanted but had been too polite to say out loud. And she had views about what I was doing with my life that she expressed freely, consistently, and always within earshot of whoever happened to be nearby. When I enrolled at Royal Military College in Kingston at 18, she told my father it was a phase. When I graduated 4 years later and was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Canadian Army, she told people at my father's Christmas party that I had joined because I couldn't get into a real university. When I was deployed overseas for the first time, she sent me a card that said she hoped I would stay safe and find a clearer direction when you get back. I never wrote back. My father never said anything. That was the part that stayed with me through all of it. Not Diane's words, I could set those down, eventually. But his silence, the way he would look at the table when she spoke, the way he would change the subject, the way he called me on my birthday every year and talked about the weather in the East Kootenays for 11 minutes and then said he had to go. I had learned to stop expecting more than that. I pulled into the parking lot of the motel on Cranbrook Street just before noon. I'd driven up from Calgary that morning, the highway cutting through the mountains the way it always had, indifferent and enormous. I sat in the car for a minute after I turned the engine off. The pine smell was stronger here. The mountains sat in the distance like they were waiting for something. I checked in, left my bag, and called my aunt to let her know I had arrived. "She's already told 3 people you washed out," my aunt said, without any preamble. I didn't ask who she meant. She told Margaret Holt at the grocery store that you had some kind of breakdown and got a medical discharge. My aunt's voice had the careful flatness of someone reporting facts she found personally offensive. "And she told someone at the Legion that you were working at a call center in Toronto." I looked at the ceiling of the motel room. There was a water stain shaped vaguely like a dog. "How's Dad?" I asked. A pause. "He seems happy about the dinner." "He doesn't. I don't think he knows what she's been saying." That was probably true. And also probably not entirely true. Those 2 things had always coexisted where my father was concerned. "I'll be at the community center by 6, I said. My aunt paused again. What are you going to wear?" "I'll figure it out," I said. I had, in fact, already figured it out. I had brought my uniform. I want to explain something about that choice, because it was deliberate, and it wasn't about making a point. At least, not entirely. The dinner was a formal event honoring a member of the RCMP. There would be officers present, retired and active. There would be protocol. And I had earned the right to wear what I was going to wear. I had not worn it in Cranbrook before. I had not had a reason to. But I was done being someone who made herself smaller in rooms where she had every right to stand at full height. I pressed the jacket the night before. I checked everything twice in the mirror the next afternoon. I drove to the community center at 10 to 6 and parked in the back lot. The hall was already filling up when I walked in. Round tables with white linens and small flower arrangements in the middle. Red serge everywhere, current members and retired ones, some in their dress uniforms, some in suits. The smell of coffee and that particular kind of institutional food that community centers across this country all seem to make from the same recipe. I saw my father near the front of the room, talking to 2 men I half recognized from photographs. He looked older than I remembered. Not diminished, just weathered in a way that suited him. He had my grandmother's jaw and the kind of posture that 30 years of the RCMP builds into a person and never fully leaves. He saw me from across the room. I can't fully describe what passed over his face in that moment. It wasn't quite what I had hoped for. It wasn't nothing, either. It was complicated in the way that only 20 years of complicated history can make a face. He raised his hand in a small wave. I nodded. I found my aunt near the registration table. She hugged me tight and then held me at arm's length and looked at me with the expression she had been wearing since I was 8 years old and had climbed onto the roof of her garage on a dare. "You look," she started. "Don't," I said, but gently. She squeezed my arm instead. Diane found me 12 minutes later. She was wearing a burgundy dress and the particular kind of social smile that people wear when they want everyone nearby to notice them being gracious. She had aged, I thought. Not badly. Just more than I expected. It had been 4 years since I had seen her in person, and she had gone gray at the temples in a way she clearly hadn't decided to fully accept yet. "Rachel," she said, and kissed the air beside my cheek. "You made it." "I made it," I said. She stepped back and let her eyes move over my uniform in a way that was meant to look casual and wasn't. Her expression did something I recognized, a small recalibration, then a recovery. "That's very formal," she said. "It's a formal dinner," I said. She smiled in the particular way she had always smiled when she was about to say something she had decided to frame as a joke. "Well, I suppose if it still fits." I didn't say anything. She looked at my shoulder. I watched her look at it. I watched her decide she didn't know what she was looking at, which was fine. That was fine with me. "Your father will be happy you came," she said, and moved away toward a table where someone was already waving her over. I let out a slow breath and went to find coffee. The dinner started at 6:30. I was seated at a table near the middle of the room with my aunt, 2 of my father's former colleagues and their wives, and a woman named Brenda, who had been the detachment's civilian administrator for 20 years and seemed to know everything about everyone in a way that made her either very useful or very dangerous, depending on your situation. The speeches started before the food. There were 3 of them: the current detachment commander, a member from my father's early years in Fort Street, John, and a retired superintendent who had worked with him on something in the 90s that involved a search and rescue operation in the Rockies, and a story that had apparently become something of a legend in this part of the province. My father sat at the head table and looked deeply uncomfortable in the way that people who have spent their lives deflecting attention always look when it is pointed directly at them. He was a good man. I had always known that. The complicated part was that good men could still fail their children in the specific ways that required silence and small choices, repeated over years, to accumulate into something that hurt. I was on my 2nd cup of coffee when Diane leaned over from the adjacent table. She was speaking to a woman I didn't recognize, someone's wife, from the look of it, in from out of town. I wasn't trying to listen. I was watching my father accept a plaque and looking at his hands, which had always been the hands of someone who built things and fixed things, and thinking about how little I actually knew about his daily life anymore. Then I heard my name. "Rachel has been, well, it's been a journey." Diane's voice at the particular volume that is not quite a whisper. She joined the military right out of high school, which we supported, of course, but she had some difficulties. She was discharged, not dishonorably. Nothing like that. Just a medical thing. It's been hard for her. She's been trying to find her footing. She's up in Calgary now, I think. The woman made a sympathetic sound. "She means well," Diane said. She's always needed more guidance than most. She came tonight in the uniform, which I think is her way of, holding on." I set down my coffee cup. I did it slowly. I did it carefully. I did not look at Diane. My aunt had heard. I could see it in the way she had gone very still beside me. The way people go still when they are deciding whether to say something or wait. I reached under the table and touched her hand briefly. She looked at me. I shook my head. Not yet. The plaque presentation wrapped up. The food came out. People ate and talked, and the room filled with the particular warmth of a gathering that is genuinely fond of the person being honored, which said something real about my father, and I tried to hold on to that. I was finishing my main course when I heard the shift in the room. It's a specific sound, the sound of a room recalibrating around the presence of someone whose rank changes the air pressure. I know that sound. I have been in enough rooms where it happened to recognize it without looking up. The slight drop in nearby conversations, the straightening of backs at certain tables, the way people who have spent time in uniform orient themselves toward authority, the way compass needles orient north. I looked up. Brigadier-General Sandra Okafor was standing near the entrance. She was in uniform, which she wore the way people wear things they have never had to think about completely naturally, as though it were simply her surface. She was tall, and her posture made her seem taller. She had been, for the past 18 months, the commanding general of the Canadian Army's 3rd Canadian Division, which covered this region. She was also someone I had worked alongside for 6 weeks during a joint exercise in Wainwright 3 years ago, before everything changed, before my file looked the way it currently looked, before the letters after my name meant what they currently meant. She was also, I realized, probably here because the superintendent who had given the speech earlier had been her father's commanding officer in Fort St. John in 1987. The small world that the Canadian military and the RCMP together constitute never quite stopped surprising me. She was moving through the room with the detachment commander, accepting greetings, shaking hands. People were stepping slightly back as she passed. Not from fear, from the particular Canadian version of deference that is less theatrical than it would be elsewhere, but no less real. She turned and saw me. I stood. That was automatic. I was on my feet before I had consciously decided to stand. She crossed the room. The people at my table had noticed. The people at adjacent tables had noticed. Diane had turned in her chair. My father, at the head table, was watching. Sandra Okafor stopped in front of me, and she looked at my shoulder, and she smiled. Not a social smile. The real kind. "Colonel," she said. "I wasn't expecting to see you here." My aunt made a sound beside me, very quiet, like something she had been holding for a long time had just been released. "My father's retirement dinner," I said. "General." "Of course." She glanced toward the head table, toward my father, who was sitting very still. "You should be proud of him. 32 years is serious work." She looked back at me. "And he should be proud of you. I hope he knows what you've been doing out of Gagetown." "I'm sure he'll figure it out," I said. She smiled again, and then she was moving on. There were other hands to shake, other people to speak to, and I sat back down slowly. The table was quiet for a moment. My aunt's hand found mine under the tablecloth. I looked at the flower arrangement in the center of the table. It had small sprigs of heather in it, which I hadn't noticed before. Brenda, the detachment administrator, leaned across the table with the expression of a woman who had spent 20 years in institutional settings and knew the significance of what she had just witnessed. "Colonel?" she said. As in Lieutenant Colonel," I said. "I was promoted 14 months ago. I've been posted to 5th Canadian Division headquarters in Gagetown for the past year and a half." I was not looking at the adjacent table. I didn't need to. The speeches had said my father was a man who valued quiet service, who did the work without needing the recognition, who showed up, year after year, in remote postings and difficult circumstances without asking for acknowledgement. The superintendent had said that about him, and the room had responded with the particular recognition that happens when something is both true and visible. I understood something about him then that I hadn't quite understood before. Not forgave, that word wasn't right, and wasn't mine to use in that direction. But understood. We were, in the way that sometimes skips a generation or lands sideways, the same in that particular thing. The doing without explaining. The not needing to be seen. The problem was that he had extended that same quality to his silence about Diane, and that silence had had a cost. That part I still had to hold somewhere. After the dinner, when people were beginning to collect their coats and say their goodbyes, my father found me near the door. He was still holding the plaque under one arm. He looked at me for a moment without speaking. His eyes moved to my shoulder the way Diane's had earlier, but differently. He knew what he was looking at. He was silent for long enough that I started to say something, I'm not sure what, some social noise to fill the space, and then he said, quietly, "I didn't know about the promotion." "No," I said. "I should have known." I didn't say anything. "I should have, Rachel." "I know there are things I should have." He stopped. He looked at the plaque in his arm like he had forgotten it was there. "I'm glad you came. It wasn't enough. It wasn't close to being enough, if I was accounting for things. And I was aware, in the way I was always aware, that enough and what you actually get are two different categories, and learning to live in the space between them is its own kind of service. I'm glad too," I said. And I meant it. That was the thing. Both things could be true at once. He nodded. He looked like he might say more. Then Diane was there, coat over her arm, car keys in hand, the social smile from earlier gone, and replaced with something I had never seen on her face before. Something smaller, less certain of itself. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us said anything. My father said goodnight, and they moved toward the exit, and I stood by the door and watched them go. My aunt appeared at my shoulder. We stood there for a moment in the thinning crowd, the white linen slightly rumpled now, the coffee station being broken down by a young man in a catering vest. "Gagetown," she said finally. "You've been in Gagetown this whole time. For the last 18 months? Yes. And before that? Kingston. Then a posting out of Petawawa. Then a secondment that I can't fully talk about." She was quiet. Then, "You should have told me." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry." "You don't have to be sorry. She stopped. "I just wanted to know. That's all. I just wanted to know how you were." The last of the other guests moved past us. The room was almost empty. Outside, through the glass doors, I could see the parking lot lights, the dark outline of the mountains in the distance, the beginning of what looked like it might be the first real frost of the season settling over the rooftops of Cranbrook. It looked like home. It still looked like home. After everything. That was the part I had not expected to feel tonight, and it came quietly, the way the real things always come. Not in the ceremonies or the moments of public recognition, but in the parking lot after, in the cold air, in the sight of mountains you have known your whole life standing exactly where you left them. I held the door for my aunt. We walked out into the September night together. She linked her arm through mine, the way she had when I was small and she was walking me somewhere I wasn't sure I wanted to go. "Come for breakfast tomorrow," she said. "Before you drive back." "Okay," I said. She squeezed my arm. We walked to our separate cars. I sat in mine for a minute before starting the engine. The pine smell was there, coming in through the vent. The mountains were dark shapes against a darker sky. I had not needed tonight to know who I was. That had been settled in other rooms, in other years, in work that was done without an audience. But there was something about being known correctly, completely, in the place where you had first been misunderstood, that sat differently than I had expected. Not triumphant. Not vindicated, exactly. Just true. I started the car. I drove back through Cranbrook in the dark, the streets quiet, the lights of the town doing what small town lights do, which is hold back just enough of the dark to make it feel manageable, and no more. The radio found a station playing something old and instrumental, something my mother used to have on in the kitchen on Sunday mornings before everything changed. I let it play. I knew who I was. I had known for a long time. That was enough. That had always been enough. I just hadn't let myself come home with it until now.